Welcome to another book review with M3 Collective. I'm Anjanette. Today we are discussing The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. So I started today looking at the news, doing a bit of a scroll. There's a level of stress being felt not only within my own nervous system, but within community. I'm in Canada, Simon in Canada, Edwin is in the United States, beyond our countries, globally as well. We selected this book a couple of months ago. What we do as a collective is each week we come together, we talk about things that are happening in our lives, and we try to expand, learn, grow through the wisdom found in between covers, pages of books. So the upside of stress seemed very appropriate to the times, particularly where I'm at as well. So what did you guys think? Do you recommend this book? Is it something that landed with you in a similar way that it landed with me as being very timely, impactful?
I recommend this book. I think that stress touches everyone, no matter where we live. Now, where you live can play a role in it. So depending on the country that you live in, I think more developed countries, people experience higher degrees of stress, more so like destinations. Places like the United States, people often experience very high stress, whereas Mauritius has some of the lowest stress in the world. However, folks that live there still experience stress. So even if you live in New York City or in a beachfront island, there's stress in both instances. And so how we respond to stress has a significant impact on our life, on our longevity, our health. And so I think all of us should develop mechanisms in order to manage with stress effectively.
In this book, research showed that the higher a nation's stress index, the higher the nation's well-being, which Kelly McGonigal says is a stress paradox. And you would think that a nation with a higher level of stress, that there were different indexes that they measure stress by, the higher the nation's well-being. So yeah, does that change your perception of stress?
I guess for me, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, right? Stress is there, whether you like it or not. And I think this is a great read to remind us about this talk about what stress is, how we should handle them or manage them. So overall, I think this is a great book. I definitely would recommend the book Upside of Stress to everyone. Yeah, that's a good find. It doesn't go into too much research details. It has enough stories in there. So overall, I think I definitely enjoy reading this.
And I think what I found really good too was that she has these mindset practices that are very practical. So many of the books that we've read included a lot of research, a lot of academia, some practical steps that we can take, but they didn't feel very practical. And I think that this book did a really good job of making sure that the practices were accessible so that when you are inside the most stressful moments of your life, that you can call upon some of the questions she poses, some of the reflections, like when you're in the thick of it. And the book highlights these mindset interventions, she calls them, in gray. So easy reference, easy to go back to read again what she suggests that you can shift, persist during those most difficult moments. So I found that really helpful.
I think the other aspect of it is you talk about practical. I think of it as a tool. It will enhance or complements the kind of life tools that I've already have. And so in particular, things like, managing how we react emotionally, what we think about when we get into a stressful situation. Stress doesn't come, with explicit tagging on it to say, this is stress is coming at you. A lot of the times, kind of gradually, comes, all of a sudden realize that I'm actually feeling it now. Right? Whatever the situation might be, at the beginning you may think that I can handle this. There's no problem. But over time, gradually, you realize that, oh, this is getting to me now. And so do we have the proper tools handy to deal with that? So I think for those who read the book, start to really understand it, right? All the different, transformation that they talk about, the practical aspects of it is definitely gonna, help with the set of tools that I can have with me.
We all have something that we're going through. Academic stress, work stress, health stress, financial stress, social anxiety. Our mental mindset, how we show up to those situations can influence if we have anxiety, depression, or even when we have a loss in our lives. That often deals with stress. Create stress. Now, very recently, I was speaking to a friend we hadn't caught up in a long time, and he was just telling me everything that he had going on in his life. And I'm just saying to myself, holy smokes, this one individual over the 1 hour conversation had everything, had all the different stresses, had work stress, trying to find a new job, academic stress, kids not performing as well in school, had health stress. Wife or ex-wife had a bout of cancer, mother died, had that loss. And that's a lot of things that hit us. Often it doesn't necessarily hit us one by one. It hits us at all times. It hits us together. And so creating effective mechanism tools can help us to really survive and get by these storms that we all have to face.
That's an interesting point too. We prepare for so much in our lives. Like we prepare for work challenges, we prepare for life events, but do we prepare ourselves for how to handle everyday stress, sort of bigger senses of stress? And also you brought up an interesting point, Edwin, how to bear witness to somebody else's stress, how to bear witness to the world's stress, noticing how it affects you, your own well-being. Because I think that at the core of this book is that we have a choice, right? We can either view stress as bad, which Kelly McGonigal in this book says our nation, North America, generally sees stress as bad, right? The source of cardiovascular diseases, the source of a myriad of different physical ailments, myriad of different psychological negative conditions like depression, anxiety, like clinical anxiety. She poses that stress isn't necessarily a bad thing, that we can use the energy that stress creates. She talks about the fight response, which is a nervous system response. It produces energy in our body. It opens up our mind. So we can either use that energy of stress to spiral down the rabbit hole of creating more stress, which saps more of our energy, or we can use that energy to in a beneficial sense. So I'm going to go back just a step, and there's a really good reflection toward the end of the book that really encapsulates what the book is about. So Kelly McGonigal, in The Upside of Stress, she states that stress increases the risk of health problems except when people regularly give back to their communities. Stress increases the risk of dying except when people have a sense of purpose. Stress increases the risk of depression, except when people see a benefit in their struggles. Stress is paralyzing, except when people perceive themselves as capable. So we have the good and the bad. Our current perception of stress generally is it increases health problems, risk of dying, depression. It can be paralyzing. And what she's introducing in this book is how we think about stress, how we act within those stressful moments. It can give us a completely different biochemical response, but like a mindset response. And then she goes through steps on how to achieve that. So at the end of the book, having some time to reflect, have either of you integrated some of the suggestions in the book into your own practice or into your own stressful moments?
Volunteering, helping others is really like one of those things that I try to make time to do, if not daily, at least weekly, because irrespective, it makes the stress or the situation or the circumstance that I'm in almost seems small. And you do get that feeling of self-worth and the benefit of helping others and seeing them light up. And while you still might be going through the storm, right, you're allowing other people to not have to go through that same storm, or you're giving them the tools in order to make their lives easier or better in order to resolve any issues that they're facing or dealing with. So I really believe in giving back, helping others, volunteering, just sowing that seed. It snowed here recently, just shoveling the sidewalk of a neighbor so that they don't have to do it, right? Just pouring into other people, it just always has just positive ramifications on your life. And it just it improves your self-worth. You're doing something that's important. Then also the pure joy that you see on someone else's face when you're pouring into them really is good food for the soul.
Yeah, definitely connecting with others will help with your own situations that you're going through at the moment. And I think, Edwin, you're the friend that you were talking about that's going through all the different types of stress. I think that's part of him connecting with you, sharing those things with you, right? I mean, he could have just kept all that to himself, right? But I think by willing to share that with somebody, I think that's also probably a way for him to deal with those things that's coming at him. And for me, the other ways to deal with my own stress day to day starts with my faith, right? I'm a Christian. I go to church, and I think that kind of provides me with a purpose, right? This is what I call a purpose-driven life. There's a book on it, and for me, that is the ultimate why, right? This is what why is for me, right? And then everything else that comes after eventually goes back to this why. What is my purpose in my life? And so whenever I'm getting into a stressful situation, I would just remind myself, this is my why, and this thing that I'm doing is connected or ties back to the why, and that helps a lot, right? To know my purpose. There's a meaning for me to be in that situation. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we just jump into anything, get ourselves into stressful situations just for the fun of it, right? But before we get into the situation, we should also be asking, should I be committed to this thing? Or should I be joining this company? Should I be taking this, course? Because all those have certain commitment will bring stress to you. So let's make sure that we chose the different things that that we want to do in alignment with our why. Then when the decision becomes difficult or tough, then we have this this why to fall back to. It will definitely help a lot with all the stress that comes with it.
I think the why has purpose-driven, meaningful life has been a thread through all of the books that we've read so far. And certainly in this book, it's like connecting to a meaningful life. What makes your life meaningful? Connecting to your values, connecting to service of community is the remedy to all of the negative emotions, negative physical, psychological ramifications of stress. And so I think establishing your why, establishing what matters in your life. And in this book, she suggests that you take a moment to write on what's important to you. What are your values? If you are strongly connected to that, it will show up in those moments of anxiety, stress, being connected to something bigger than your circumstances, so bigger than your current stressful circumstances. And Simon, you mentioned faith. And for me too, faith is so important in those moments. Part of the stress dissipates a bit. It fuels it into motivation to find a way out or overcome, to shift, to persist. I think it's important here to also note, and it was noted in the book, that there are some instances of trauma that are definitely more difficult to apply these to, that we're not making light, nor does the book make light of stressful moments, finding the gift or benefit in all stressful moments, but we can still choose how to respond to our situation. So when we're in those stressful moments, remembering our values can help transform stress into something that helps us deepen our priorities, deepen our connection to what matters to us. So coming back to faith, for me, if there are any Christians in our audience, I definitely would recommend The Upside of Stress as a secular book that helps reinforce your faith. I think it gives a lot of science, some neurobiology in here as well that helps support why it's so important to connect to your faith as a practice daily as preparation for those stressful moments. Not only as preparation for those stressful moments, but as something that could help you prepare, shift, persist during those stressful moments. So Edwin and Simon, some thoughts, reflections regarding the practice of faith?
Oh, as it relates to faith, faith connects you to a higher power. And so as you think of your life and your meaningfulness in your life, you're connected to an additional energy source. And so as you have that additional energy source, you realize it's just not me in this world. And I do have a different set of beliefs and principles that allow me to deal with certain things. And then of course, as a Christian or as someone of faith, I'm always giving. I'm sowing a seed into the ministry of the church. I'm sowing a seed and I'm helping other people. I'm attending church every Sunday, and I'm connecting with other members and helping to witness, bringing people towards Christ. So all of those aspects, as it relates to faith, plays a role in to reduce the stress and to reduce the things that you're going through. And then also to take a step back, being a part of a community of people, especially the faith community, you now have pastor and deacons and other members that you can witness to and that you can conversate with in order to deal with some of the anxiety and some of the problems and some of the challenges that are going on in your life. So being connected with God and being connected with faith can also help implementing the tenets of the Bible. So having faith combined with understanding this book is very helpful in your life and effectively managing your situations.
Yeah, if you have your faith, and that means you acknowledge there is a higher power in control. And so for me, things like stress and feeling anxiety is because I am not in control of certain situations or certain matters. But if I acknowledge that there is a higher power who is in control of everything, including my life and so on, then it feels a lot better, right? Because this God that I believe will be there to help. And all of a sudden that thing that I have no control of doesn't matter, because my God will be there to intervene and help as the time comes. It's almost like watching my kids, for example, how they look when they get into an unknown situation or a situation that they can't really solve. They will naturally look towards me. It's almost like saying, what should I do now? And that is such a great reminder whenever I see that situation. It's just like me turning to my God and saying, what should I do now? But having somebody to rely on is such a great feeling.
I think that, all of us live in urban centers within North America. And I do find within urban centers also, in today's world of scrolling, social media, and so many different news signalers, like there's a lot of information. There's a lot more people that we connect to. It's easier to become distracted. And I do find that the reminders, right, and the book actually suggests maybe you should have a physical reminder, whatever that is, that brings you back to your values. In our case, it would be our faith, connecting you to something bigger than yourselves, because I do find that all of the negative stressful things are either self-doubt or how it affects you as a person. It could affect the things that you have, like in a material sense. There's a complexity to stress that it could mean so many different things. And again, I don't tend to make light of it, but how helpful it is to connect to something bigger than you, of which you are a part. And I think that faith does that. And to take on that servant attitude, that letting go of your egoic self and putting yourself in the service of others, like this book suggests, and our faith does wonders for the intensity of stress that we feel in that moment. I think it increases our ability to continue to look for opportunities to lessen stress, to better ourselves, because here's one of the things too, is that a mindset shift doesn't necessarily change the situation, but it increases the possibilities of the circumstance that we find ourselves in, that there are options that might help the felt experience of our situation, whatever that may be. But connecting to faith and our values really helps alleviate a lot of that. So for me, this book was a reminder on a daily basis, not just when you're in a stressful situation, to connect, to grow, to reinforce and strengthen that connection to something bigger than you.
So it's kind of reminding me about the book that we read in the past, Atomic Habits. Are there any sort of habit building exercises that you guys have seen or try that will help us to build and be more prepared to deal with stressful situations?
Well, one of the ways that you can reduce stress or reduce anxiety is being prepared. Like being prepared for a big speech, practice it a number of times, and so by implementing that as a best practice. So when I know that I'm going to give a big speech, in order to reduce the stress that I have in my life or reduce my stress that I'm going to have in giving that speech, let me prepare. So let me embrace the habit of preparing for every speech. And in doing so, I'm gonna perform better when I get out on the stage. I should do better when I get out there on the stage and perform that speech. So I think it can help you in public speaking. It can help you with respect to taking a test. So being over prepared is going to improve and it's going to help your confidence. And so you can reduce a lot of the stress that we receive in life is sort of self-afflicted, right? So if I have stress or anxiety before taking this test, in order to reduce that stress and anxiety going forward, let me make sure that I read the chapter. Let me make sure that I complete the practice tests or practice quizzes. Let me make sure that I'm up to speed. And then as I perform better, or as I'm better prepared, or if I take the habit of preparing, then my performance will increase, my performance will rise, and my confidence will rise because I've developed some healthy habits. Developing and having healthy habits can correlate with reducing and improving the manner in which stress enters your life because you're prepared. So just like financial stress, if I take the habit of saving $100 a week, every single week over the period of my life, then as I get to 50 and 60, or as I get older, because of compounding interest and all of that fun stuff, I'm going to be in a better situation. So my financial stress is not going to be as severe because I've had healthy habits along the way in order to build myself up.
That's a great
So,
point too, is this like level of preparedness. So if, Edwin, you talked about like a test or like if it was a presentation, there is this practical component of preparedness, right? Have you studied? Have you put together your notes for your presentation, and do you know what you're going to talk about like inside and out, and are you practiced in that? And so there's that like, disciplined approach, that habit of discipline and preparedness in that respect. And I will add to that, there's this habit of mindful awareness. And so I practice meditation and mindfulness, which is also prayer for me as well. And that ability to also see your habits of what is your stress mindset? How do you habitually deal with stress? So let's take the test taking or perhaps a presentation. Are you habitually anxious around it? Do you self-doubt? Is it like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do well? It doesn't matter how much I prepared, I'm not going to do well. Or, you know what, I'm just going to somehow flub this presentation. Do you have habitual self-doubt or like imposter syndrome, no matter or independent of how much you've prepared? Because at that point, your mindset of self-doubt, it could be like your habitual thought that you're going to somehow fail, is going to counteract like your preparedness. You could be as prepared as anyone is, and it takes that self-doubt to really disintegrate all of the effort that you made. And so in this book, it was really good because she talks about the effect you expect is the effect you get. So for me, it's developing the awareness, the habit of becoming aware of your mindset and then bringing in those mindset interventions so that you could have a strong mindset like I've got this versus I'm going to fail this, and couple that with the practical preparedness of studying and researching for your presentation or test. Combine those two, and that is your superpower.
I think Edwin and Anjanette, what you guys said, just now is I got a lot more follow up questions or comments on it. One, I think Edwin, you talk about preparing for this big important speech. You definitely it's can be a stressful situation, and being prepared definitely helps. But I guess the way I was going through my mind as you were speaking is, it is also because I made that to be a big, important speech. And that's why it kind of gave myself that sort of stressful feeling. I guess what I'm trying to get to this is also how important we view certain things. How important is the test to you? How important is the speech to you? Right? Because I have witnessed many times, let's say politicians going into different events, they give a speech. And some prepare and some don't. Why is that? Why didn't they prepare for every single thing? Well, maybe because they've been doing this all day long. They might have been feeling, overconfidence maybe that I can win this. I've been doing this every single day. But yet, it's terrible. But then also, as I get older, is that nobody remembers my speech anyway. Even if I did a terrible one, all of a sudden it's like, do I still want to put in that much effort to prepare? So if nobody cares, the next day, especially if I'm not a politician, it's not going to show up on papers or, YouTube. But even so, right, this, even the president of a certain company or prime minister, they make a lot of mistakes in their speech, but they move on from it. Nobody remembers the last guy who did a mistake in one of their speeches. Do we remember? I mean, we laugh at it whenever it shows up, but then it's like we moved on. So then I guess the question is, by adjusting how we feel about certain things, and also if nobody cares about this, would that be helpful to reduce the amount of stress that we get?
I think it might not just be about the presentation, and that could help alleviate stress. It might not just be this test, right? If you think more macroly and you think, well, it's part of like the bigger picture of things. If you're making a speech, sometimes it is like you will see in movies, it's that person when they throw away your little cue cards and you talk from your heart. That's when you're really heard. That's when you are delivering a message that has impact and passion and meaning to it. And that's when you're also connected to your values. It's connected to, what's important. You're connected to serving the people you're talking to versus reflecting and obsessing about, oh my gosh, how do I look? Or, oh my gosh, am I saying the right thing? I think that in that instance, when you're making a speech, what flips for me is when you feel like you're at service to the people you're talking to. That's when you become less obsessive about social anxiety or like, oh my gosh, how do I sound? Like, for instance, this podcast, when I watch myself back, I think, oh my gosh, I just don't really video well. I kind of sound funny. And you obsess about the small things, but then you think the reason why we came together as a group during the pandemic was really to help each other and ourselves within it expand our thinking, expand beyond our current circumstances, and see how we can serve each other and the world. And I think that is the reason for me that we're doing these podcasts as well. Not that I have this grandiose, amazing thoughts to share, but maybe just my small little thoughts on books that we've read, on experiences that we have, how certain wisdoms have landed in us and has changed us. Maybe that will create a small ripple. I think that shifts my anxiety about, oh my gosh, I sound really weird, or what does my voice matter? Because I actually think, what does my voice matter really? But when I drop that and I'm speaking from my heart and what really matters to me, and that maybe there might be just one person that read this book, it's really good, put it right way. Maybe this might help you as well. Shifting to that thinking does enormously helps me come away from any negative thought I might have about how I sound.
And another way is to get somebody else to edit our videos, and that will help us not having to listen to ourselves. Edwin, anything else to add to this? Yeah, so the other sort of follow-up to the previous question is age. When someone is just starting out, I think tests and so on are important, My kids are, going into universities, and there's a lot of university applications, and the tests that they are going through right now are very important because that determines whether they get into certain universities or not. But as we get older, myself, for example, if I were to take a certification test, and if I don't do well, so what? Right? I think the two situations, at least I imagine it, is different. It would be more stressful for them because they really care about that. And then for me, I have less impact whether I do well or not do well. And so I would approach it, of course, I'm still going to prepare. I want to do well, but it's just without the stress, in fact, I might do actually quite well. And that's why some people, they are very intelligent and smart, but then they just don't do well in exams. Why is that? Because they put certain stress in themselves to say, I need to perform. And that's when they don't perform. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I'll just say something. The book's definition of stress here, or the definition that's used in the book, to coincide with what you just said, Simon, what arises when something you care about is at stake. So when something that you care about is at stake, that in itself can induce a form of stress. So if it's the test, if it's the book report, if it's the speech, if it's the big game or the big moment, then that is when stress normally raises its head. So when something you care about is at stake. And so again, or just to mention, the way that you counterbalance that is to be prepared when you care about is at stake. You have to yourself build that habit of being prepared and being capable and being able to make sure that you arise to that occasion. When you take that in America, when you're trying to get into college, you either take the ACT or the SAT. Now, before you take that test, there's the SAT or the practice SAT. And part of the reason or the rationale of that practice test is to get you prepared for taking a big test like that. To get you to drive to the testing center and to have the appropriate number of pencils and to have the number and have the correct calculator and take that test. Now, the test doesn't get scored, or it gets scored, but it doesn't count towards your admission. But at the very least, it gets rid of some of that anxiety so that you know what to expect going forward. And so it all comes down to preparation. It all comes down to how we arise when we come and as we enter those stressful situations in our lives.
And I think also we've been talking about habit because we read Atomic Habits and we all recommended that book. And it's when we come to that test that we're talking about, our habitual response to a situation which can be intense and stress generative. So this book asks us to look at how we think about stress. So when we think about taking a test or making a presentation, I'll read some of the questions that she asks us to ask of ourselves. As she says, notice how thinking about stress in your habitual way makes you feel. Does it motivate you? Does it inspire you? Or does it exhaust you? Does it paralyze you? So you have a test tomorrow. It's huge. It's worth 90% of your mark. How does that make you feel? And so in this book, she's really advocating, first it's noticing, and that's a practice of mindfulness as well, is like first noticing your habitual response to something that is going to be fairly big in your life, like this big exam or test, or it could be a big presentation that you need to make. And also, she questions how we habitually react to other people's stress. So Simon, you mentioned your children taking their tests. So notice how we react to the stress people have around us and the way that they talk about their stress. So when other people complain about stress, does it make you feel anxious? Do you try to avoid people when they're the most frazzled? Or do we use other people's stresses as an invitation to vent about our own problems, as if we were competing to see whose life is more stressful? So yeah, I'm going to put those questions out to all of us as well. Like, how do you habitually react to, number one, your own stress, and number two, other people's stress?
Yeah, great questions. I guess at this point in my life, I'm not sure, but feeling overconfidence here, but it's just throughout the years of working and dealing with different situations, I think we get better. We learned even before I read this book. I think I can handle stress fairly well. The other thing that overlaps a little bit is the previous book that we read, Positive Intelligence. It also analyzes a little bit of, how positive are we in terms of looking at certain situations? I think I'm a pretty positive person and able to handle a large amount of stress fairly well. And I think my body also signals to me that, it is time to slow down or it's time to take a break because I am at my limit. So there's certain mechanism in my own physical body and as well as my mindset in helping me to cope with all this. And I think it's through practice. Some of these things you just cannot. There's no shortcut to it. When I was younger, definitely I feel more stress, more anxiety. But maybe through what I mentioned earlier, it's just that I'm more established. I have the experience in my field. I'm more confident. I've seen, just like what Evan is saying, you are in there, you are more prepared. The practice exam, I've gone through a lot of real life examples. So I think I've seen a lot of the situation. I wouldn't say I've seen all the situations, but I've seen a lot of situations. I'm feeling much more in control. I think control is very key. I feel much more in control of a lot of those situations. So yeah, time, practice, be prepared, knowing what's coming, having the feeling of more control. They all helps with managing stress better.
Yeah. In the book here, they talk about a psychologist, Alia Crum, and Aya Crum's research indicates that you can either address whatever the circumstance is, or you can try to escape it. And so I'm going to just attack escapism. People develop and they try to distract themselves. They try to focus on getting rid of their feelings. And thirdly, people turn to alcohol or drugs. And then some people just withdraw from the situation. And so withdrawal, alcoholism, distractions, and then getting rid of the feelings instead of addressing the source. And so the first thing to note here is that those are sort of negative responses to stress. And so you shouldn't be doing those things. You shouldn't turn to alcohol, you shouldn't turn to drugs, you shouldn't try to escape it, right? You should not take those actions. Now, when the stress comes and the stress enters your life, then what you want to do is you want to be able to identify it, and you want to build positive traits and positive mechanisms in order to deal with that. So you need to accept the fact that the situation is real. You need to plan a strategy on how to deal with it, talking to other people, seeking advice, leaning in to trying to solve the problem versus running away from the problem, taking steps to ultimately overcome and remove the source of stress in your life, and try to make the situation better by viewing it more positive as an opportunity to learn and grow. I'm not sure if this book goes into it. Maybe this book does. I don't recall where it is in this book, but in one of the books that we've read, it said that you should take every situation in your life that's bad and think of 3 positive outcomes as a result of it. So irrespective of whatever the situation's bad, think of 3 positive things that have happened as a result of it. And as you start to, and then focus on those 3 things that have happened as a result of it versus the negative thing that took place.
I do recall in this book that discussion, and she did preface it with some traumatic occurrences that are very difficult to do that for. But there have been people, and there's stories that are told of people who have been in the most adverse, the most traumatic of instances. And with time, they are able to find their connection to their strength or abilities that they were able to then share out. And I think it's time. I think, both Edwin and Simon, you mentioned that these things do take time. So maybe when someone's in the thick of an incredibly stressful occurrence, that it might not be the time to look for benefits, but time is needed to heal from certain situations. But Edwin, when you were sharing, the escapism too, it reminded me of failure. I think to some capacity, each of us have described moments in our lives where, we would categorize it as a failure. They could be large or they could be small mistakes that we've made. And there is that surge of a little bit of stress. You can probably feel it in your body. And we have 2 choices. We can escape it. We can deny it. We can shift blame. We've seen that. I'm sure we've all shared moments where we've seen in our own workplaces where that occurs. Or we can stay with the discomfort, take accountability, look at the source, see without judgment. Simon, you mentioned the Positive Intelligence, another book that we read by Shazad Shemaine, taking away the judge, like that sense of, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person, or oh my gosh, why didn't I know? But instead, take accountability, try to, how did the way I acted or what I did compound this to an experience of failure? How can I do that differently? Who can I connect to help resource me so that that doesn't happen again, or I will be better prepared if this type of situation happens again? Do I need to make reparations? Did impact someone adversely that I need to now make reparations for? How can I fix this? So having that attitude in this book, Kelly McGonigal says that versus resisting it and denying it, which actually does lead to a physical ailments, but choosing the path of sitting with the discomfort, not avoiding or escaping the situation, actually is healthier. And she calls it a stress inoculation. So if you take accountability, you don't judge or adopt those negative feelings of failure, but instead proactively take the situation to a more beneficial trajectory, that you are inoculating yourself to future stressful moments where you will be better prepared to deal with it. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on that in framing escapism and how to deal with failure and the stress of failure?
Yeah, the I hope we don't escape every single time we run into a stressful situation. But on the flip side, there are times when we do need to go, get out of that situation. I think it's a matter of, have we tried to resolve or fix the situation? It reminded me of quite a few years ago when I first sort of starting out in management. I'm not going to name here, but I was with a company that I find very unorganized from a senior management perspective. The leadership and how they set up the whole culture was very intensive, very toxic. And me being there with less experience in sort of navigating that situation really caused a lot of stress for myself. I would say that's probably the most stressful work environment that I've been in all my career. That says a lot. And looking back, of course, it's like I could have handled this much way differently, and then the outcome might be different. So I was stuck with it, even though I knew that it was not a comfortable environment. But I stuck with it. I tried to change certain things, whatever I could. But at the end, I still quit from that place. Is it trying to escape from it? I don't think I will categorize it as trying to escape, because I did put up quite a bit of attempts to fix the situation. But by the way, that's the only job that I quit. So, but looking back, I think that is where I was able to turn that stress and learn and grow from that environment, that situation. Because after that place, I was able to handle any other places, because none of them is that intense. None of them is that toxic. And because I've gone through something like that, I'm so much stronger and better in dealing with all the things that come after that, right? That if you want to, put it on a graph of how I handle, stressful situation, from that point kind of jumped up a lot. My tolerance, me being able to read the certain situations and able to come up with a proper response has gone up so much after going through that situations.
I also think that leaving a situation is an escapism. And so, for instance, if you're in a job that does not serve your greater purpose, or if you're in an abusive relationship, I think that escaping your circumstances isn't what she would call escapism or avoidance. I think that the escapism and avoidance would not use the abusive relationship. Escaping or avoidance might be turning to alcohol and
Hmm.
drugs to deny what's happening, or to say, you know what, to attribute blame on yourself versus abuser, or to say, well, this is why the abuse is happening, to explain it away would be escapism. And I
Hmm.
think what this book suggests of how to handle stress is that you don't allow that negative circumstance that you find yourself in to toxify you, to be your own poison. So to paralyze you, to exhaust you, to incapacitate you, that instead you could use the energy that stress gives you in that instance to try to find a way out, to connect to other people that can help you, to resource yourself, and you might have children too. So there's a lot of different circumstances. But I think what the book tries to get at is that we have a choice. We can use the energy that stress gives us to paralyze you, to deny, to escape, to avoid, or we can use the energy that stress gives you to then start to mobilize your own resources, your strength, your bravery, your courage, to then leave a circumstance that is draining you, that's causing more stress. So we can actually use the energy of stress to escape stress, or we can use the energy of stress to, like a cyclone, fuel more stress. So that's how I see it. Edwin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's clearly here. So the U.S. Department of Veterans Administration in Palo Alto, California, they did a study with more than 1,000 participants over a decade. And they found that those participants that actively avoided stress were more likely to become more depressed in the following decade. And it also contributed to negative outcomes, such as getting divorced, being fired from work. And it was an avoidance of stress was a predictable behavior that led to more depression, more conflict, and more negative events beyond the study. And so what they found here is that when you start to avoid stress or avoid certain situations, those situations never go away. So all they do is get worse. And so participants deplete their resources and the situations become so large that they cannot effectively deal with it when it actually comes to fruition. And so psychiatrists or psychologists call this cycle the cycle of stress generation, where you end up creating more sources of stress while depleting the resources that should be supporting you. As the stress piles up, you become increasingly overwhelmed and isolated, and therefore even more likely to rely on additional avoidant coping mechanisms in order to stay clear of the stress or escape the stressful situation. My point behind saying all of that is that there's actual clinical evidence to show that avoidance is not an effective strategy to deal with stress.
That reminds me too. So through this book, I and a few of the other books that we've read, I came up with this little tool that helped me think about things. And the research with the veterans reminded me of it. And I actually put it to the side in case this came up in our conversation. But if we think of our energy like a battery, like this reminded me of our cell phone, where we're running on empty, or we have a full battery level, 100%. And something stressful happens to us. It could have been like 10 years ago. And we found it really stressful and negative, and it was, right? And we have a choice in that instant. It's like we don't necessarily have a choice of the circumstances that we're given, but we do have a choice, as hard as it may be, to respond in a way that fuels us versus brings us down. So avoidant behavior feels really good, but it actually takes away our energy to do anything else. So we deplete really quickly. We think that we're not running on empty, but we are if we use that avoidance strategy, like addictions or a destructive behavior. Sometimes it's lashing out to other people. There's a lot of different avoidant behaviors. Instead of refueling ourselves and finding our strength and courage and joy, is sometimes avoidant behaviors. We falsely think that they're fueling us, but we're denying that positive source of energy and fuel, and we're giving it away to something that is no longer present. So we've talked about failures, or how often do people failed in the past and that failure still defines who they are today. And that's not to negate that the past experience was in fact traumatic, that was terrible and life altering. And as hard as it is, it's facing into the discomfort of what to do with that and where we get our energy and fuel from in this moment that I think that we're talking about today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good use of the post-it notes. I like that. That's a good way to illustrate a battery and how it's yeah. And we need ways to recharge our batteries, and avoidance is definitely not the right way to go.
And that's not to say that is so hard. It's could be the hardest thing that you are going to do. Like, I couldn't even imagine in the case of veterans, like the study you cited, Edwin, how difficult that is to sit with all of the stress that has collected and is manifesting from the experience
Right.
of war and conflict.
But again, coming time back to the what we talked about at the beginning is the book has practical ways to help us cope with that, connecting with others, being in a supportive community. Think about the growth that we can have coming out of all those stressful situations that we are in, and all those help us hopefully change mindsets, how we look at stress, and so hopefully that also helps us to deal with it.
That just reminds me, and sorry to interject, like most recovery programs, like veterans and addictions, they do have the components of this book inherent within the program. So something greater than yourself, and connecting and community is very important. I don't know, Edwin, if in that study that you were looking at, whether they cited that as being a path of healing as well.
I don't recall if it did or if it didn't, but maybe it did. I'm not sure.
So at the end of it all, at the end of this book and our reflections, if there was a single takeaway from this book that really has impacted your life and been very helpful in how each of you deal with your own stress, what would that be?
Yeah, I can take a step at that. Well, I prepared three key takeaways from the book. One is a reminder that stress is universal. Nobody can escape from it, and it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, what kind of stage in your life you are in right now. It doesn't matter. We all face stress, and the book kind of validates that. And then the second thing is it talked about we able to shift our perspective and our mindsets and look at it from a more positive perspective. And there are a lot of beneficial that can come out of it. And then the last thing is that it provided those practical approaches of how to help us deal with stressful situations. Right. So those are the key things that I got out of the book, and that's why at the beginning I recommended this book to everyone.
Yeah. If I had to take three takeaways from this book, I would say number one, I really like the fact of when you have that super stressful or challenging situations or negative outcomes that happen in your life. I really like the thought process behind trying to think of three positive things that are a result of that. That is such a powerful technique that we can all lean on in order to try to turn a dark day or a sad day into something a little bit more bearable. I would say the number two thing is the actual mindset interventions and that three-step process of learning the new point of view, doing an exercise that encourages you to adopt and apply the new mindset, and then third, providing an opportunity to share the idea with others. And so being able to develop and build effective internal mechanisms in order to deal with stress, because it's always going to happen in all of our lives, but then being able to shift your mindset, because how you respond to the situations and how you deal with situations is totally and completely up to ourselves. And so I would say the third point here, as I look through my notes here, is that is to just do as the title of the book suggests, focusing on the upside of stress, meaning you want to transform your experience, be it either physical or emotional, and allow it to change how you cope with the challenges in your life. So allow this book to discover your own strength, courage, and compassion. So use the stressful situations and allow them to be a marker or an indicator that you need to prepare, that you need to practice, and that you need to come ready in order to address whatever that situation is that happens in your life.
So beautifully said, Edwin. I think all of the books that we have been reading is part of my becoming. Becoming is a daily process. So this book is a reminder that we step into the path of who we want to be and who we are daily in a world of distraction and a world of stress, not just of our own, but of our friends and family and community and world. It's to reframe our mindset colors the entirety of our experience. So if we at the core can remind ourselves of who we are, of our values, of what we serve, that can strengthen us and give us courage and bravery and resilience to deal with whatever comes our way. And that this is something that we cultivate. It is a daily practice. It takes discipline. And then there's this certain amount of work around it to build these habits. This book reminded me of all of our ability to shift and persist. And that could be life-saving if we move from the classic flight or fight response, which can have negative effects on us physically, and shift it to a stress challenge response, which could actually benefit ourselves biochemically and neurobiologically, that to start to build that habit to become that person who can overcome stress. I think what I do is I usually have a little book with me almost at all times. And in those moments of shadow, I can reflect on something in this book that connects me to my values and connects me to the bigger why. And I added one of the questions from this book in the thick of a stressful moment to ask yourself, what action can I take or what choice can I make that is consistent with my goal, bigger than self goal, and my values in this moment? So bringing to any of the stressful moments that we discussed here, that it opens up a greater possibility of responses than just spiraling more into the trappings of that negative stress spiral. So that for me is one of the key takeaways, is honoring the deepest priorities and values that you have, and that stress can help reinforce that and fuel that.